Good day. Munir Ajam from SUKAD. In this video, it will be the first of 3 videos on planning and scheduling. Recently, one of the professionals who follow our YouTube channels have asked a question about scheduling in relationship to our methodology, which is a project life cycle methodology. So I will talk about his question in the next video. But in order to answer the question probably, and we'll talk about planning and scheduling, we will be recording 3 videos, and this is the first of 3. So we will be talking about planning and scheduling. However, obviously we cannot do a scheduling course here. We cannot get into too much detail. We're just going to touch on key concepts in relationship to scheduling, and we will do the 3 videos. This first video I will continue on after I do this introduction to talk about the process of scheduling, such as what's covered in ISO 21500 or the Body of Knowledge guide from PMI. And in the next video, I will talk about scheduling across the project life cycle, and I will do a contrast between what do we mean by process and across the project life cycle. And the third video is kind of related to this one, but I will talk about more about the concept of rolling wave planning. These are the 3 topics that I will be discussing in 3 independent videos. So first, process. Let me erase, and we'll talk about process. Small board, I'm working from home, so I hope you understand. The key is to get the message across. Okay, so what do we mean by process? When we talk about process, and this is the first video, we are talking about the process of scheduling. How do we do scheduling? Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go into detail about all the different scheduling technique and concept. This will require a 3-day course, probably, if not even more. We're just going to highlight the concept of a sequence, of a process, of how to schedule something. Whether you are dealing with something small or large, there is a process. ISO, PMI, other organizations have some kind of processes like this. So in order to schedule, and here I'm going to be talking about schedule or maybe high-level planning. And what do? Well, obviously the first thing I need to have scope, which is translated into the work breakdown structure. So we need to have work packages. We define the scope of the project, we break it down into work packages, we take these work packages and break it down. So the first step is what the scope, what are the work packages that we have to work on in this part of the project. The second step, once I have that, is that I need to break down those work packages into activities. So I need to know what are the activities that I have to do. Now, what's the difference between work package and activity? That might be a separate video that we will need to talk about in another time. But definitely we need to take a work package, for example, carpeting a room, and we break it down into specific activities that have to be done at different part of the project, maybe such as ordering, specification, delivery, installation, whatever the case might be, to complete a work package. So we break down all work packages on the project into activities. Then we sequence those activities. This is the kind of logic that's included in a PMBOK guide. We sequence the activities, so we need to determine the relationship between these activities, what comes first, what can go in parallel, what have to have finish to start relationship, start to start, finish to finish, all these wonderful scheduling terms. Again, you can refer to PMBOK guide on ISO and you can learn more about those things. So I just want to talk about sequence here. After we do the sequence, we would have, as an output of that, we would have a network diagram. We need to determine durations. Duration for each activity. And once we know all the duration of all the activities, and in order for us to be able to determine the duration, we must first know the resource requirement. Why? Because resources have a direct impact on the duration. A quick example. I want to dig a hole. Yeah, maybe 10 cubic meter hole in the ground. If I have a machine, the resource being a machine, and a backhoe, I probably need the backhoe, the operator, and maybe a laborer to help, and I can dig a hole maybe in half an hour. However, if my resource is human labor, then that might take a full day to dig a hole that big. So the duration of each activity depends on the resource. Of course, if we don't have to talk about machine or labor, it could be programming, it could be web design, it could be any type of work. What resources are you going to use? And you need to consider those in order to determine the duration. Once I know that, now we have the critical, we don't have the critical path yet. That's what we need to go to next. But we have the activities defined. We have the logical relationship between them in a network diagram. We have the duration for each activity. Then the next step is I can do the critical path analysis. And obviously, the critical path analysis gives us the critical path, which is the longest path on the project, that will determine the duration of the project. With this sequence here, and I would have done our initial schedule. And I need to emphasize the point is initial schedule. Why? Because, of course, I still have to look at risk management. I have to look at so many other things before I can finalize the project. So what else could we do? These are the core steps to develop initial schedule. Then what do we do next? Well, there are many things we can do. And I'm not going to put them in sequence here because they are really spread around. Obviously, I can resource load the schedule, which means now I have all the activities. Obviously, I know what the resources are because I use the resources to determine duration. I can input that information into a scheduling model, a scheduling tool, MS Project, Primavera, or any other scheduling tools you might be using. So we can do resource loaded. And resource loading might give us some kind of labor or people or equipment, whatever the case. You might have situations that look like this. If I'm using a histogram, well, the resource fluctuate. In construction and capital project, we call this peaks and valleys. This fluctuation in terms of resources may not be possible or logical on a project. So what do? We try to do resource smoothing or resource leveling as much as possible. Again, I'm not going to go into all of these details. I just want to explain what could happen. So this is one thing that we could do, resource loading. Another thing we can do, of course, we need to do risk management on the schedule. And based on risk management on the schedule, we might have to come up with changes to the scheduling model. So obviously, this could impact the schedule. This could impact the schedule. We can do optimization of the schedule, shortening the schedule if we need to. Although we don't advise it in the planning, but that's definitely something that could be done. So we could optimize the schedule. And by optimize, it could mean shorten the schedule. And of course, if you study for certification or some topics, you will know there are two major techniques here, which is fast tracking and crushing. Now, many of you who have studied maybe for PMP or other certification exam, you probably know this stuff already. What you probably miss, and I will be ending this video with this focus here. And I've made that statement in many videos. Maybe you haven't had the chance to see some of my other videos. What we believe is that the PMBOK guide, ISO, Yeah? And not only what we believe, it's actually what's stated in those references, is that the processes, the process groups, I did not talk about the process group here, but let me zoom back to the process group, which is initiating, planning, implementing, controlling, and closing an ISO, are repeated in every phase or stage of the project. So obviously we have planning processes, and which what we discussed for scheduling today. I was discussing the scheduling planning processes. I did not talk about schedule control. Yeah? That we do for a stage of the project. So we use the process groups and the individual processes to help us schedule, plan, control, implement a stage work. If you really read the PMBOK guide and ISO carefully, you will notice that's what they are talking about. Although they don't use those words and they talk about project management, in reality, those guides are about phase management. Unless it's very tiny project, the whole project might be a week or two long, and you can do those process group as project phases. Why I'm saying this? Because the process group are not project phases. The process group are not the project life cycle, and the process group repeat in every stage. So once again, what I discussed today is the process of scheduling. Whether you would want to schedule the whole project, or schedule a phase of the project, or maybe schedule a major task of the project, ideally, this is the concept and sequence that we have to consider and work with. So when I talk about video 1, process scheduling, we are talking about most likely the scheduling of a phase or stage of the project. Thank you.